I stand before you today not merely to speak about a dream, but to speak about the philosophy that gave that dream its wings. For a dream without philosophy is a shadow without substance, a cloud without rain. The dream that stirred a nation was not born in comfort, nor shaped in silence. It was forged in the fires of injustice and illuminated by the unshakable belief that truth crushed to earth will rise again. The moral law of justice stands above the statutes written by human hands and the decrees signed by earthly authority. It is not drafted in legislative chambers nor confined within the pages of law books. It is inscribed upon the conscience of humanity and rooted in the eternal order of right and wrong. Long before governments were formed and constitutions were framed, this law breathed life into the human spirit and whispered that fairness, dignity, and equality are not privileges granted by power, but birthrights granted by the Creator. This law teaches that justice is not determined by majority vote. A crowd may approve injustice and a nation may legalize discrimination, yet neither can transform wrong into right. History bears witness to moments when laws upheld segregation, exploitation, and cruelty. Yet beneath those unjust systems stirred a deeper truth, declaring that legality does not equal morality. The moral law of justice becomes the measuring rod by which human laws must be tested. When a law uplifts human personality, it aligns with this higher standard. When it degrades, segregates, or silences, it stands in opposition to the sacred order of justice. The moral law of justice also affirms the inherent worth of every individual. It proclaims that each person, regardless of race, color, class, or condition, carries within them a spark of divine value. No system has the authority to diminish that worth. No prejudice can erase it. This law does not fluctuate with cultural trends or political convenience. It remains constant, like the North Star guiding a traveler through the darkness. It insists that every barrier built upon inequality contradicts the very fabric of moral reality. Furthermore, this law calls for accountability beyond human recognition. A person may evade the courts of society, but no one escapes the court of conscience. When injustice is committed, something within the human soul recoils. There is a restlessness that cannot be quieted until wrong is confronted and right is restored. The moral law of justice awakens that restlessness, urging individuals and nations alike to examine their conduct and realign with the principles of fairness and compassion. This law demands courage, for obedience to it often requires standing against popular opinion. Those who follow it may face misunderstanding, criticism, or persecution. Yet throughout history, reformers and freedom fighters have drawn strength from this higher calling. They recognize that moral obedience sometimes means civil disobedience when earthly laws contradict eternal truth. Their actions were not rooted in rebellion for its own sake, but in loyalty to a greater justice that transcends time and territory. The moral law of justice binds humanity together in shared responsibility. It reminds us that injustice inflicted upon one diminishes the moral health of all. It challenges societies to rise above prejudice and self-interest, to craft laws that reflect compassion, and to build institutions that mirror equity. In its presence, silence becomes complicity, indifference becomes betrayal, and neutrality becomes a surrender of conscience. The power of nonviolence is not a passive surrender to evil, nor a timid retreat from conflict. It is a courageous confrontation with injustice that refuses to mirror the hatred it opposes. Nonviolence stands as a disciplined force, rooted in the conviction that moral strength outweighs physical aggression. It does not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, but to awaken the conscience and win friendship and understanding. In this philosophy, the aim is not the destruction of the adversary, but the transformation of the relationship. Nonviolence recognizes that violence breeds a tragic cycle. When fists answer fists and bullets answer bullets, the chain of bitterness lengthens and the night of hostility deepens. Retaliation may satisfy an immediate urge, but it multiplies resentment and plants seeds for future conflict. Nonviolence interrupts this cycle. It refuses to repay hate with hate, understanding that hatred only intensifies division. Instead, it introduces a new element into the struggle, the redemptive power of love. Love, in this sense, is not sentimental affection, but steadfast goodwill, a determination to seek the highest good, even for those who inflict harm. At its core, nonviolence demands inner discipline. It calls upon individuals to master anger rather than be mastered by it. This discipline does not deny the reality of suffering or injustice. It confronts them openly and boldly. Marches, boycotts, sit-ins, and acts of civil disobedience become instruments of protest that expose injustice to the light of public scrutiny. Through peaceful resistance, oppression is revealed in its true form, and the moral contrast between cruelty and compassion becomes unmistakable. The power of nonviolence also rests upon faith, faith that the universe bends toward justice and that moral truth carries an enduring authority. Those who embrace nonviolence trust that unearned suffering can become a catalyst for change. When individuals endure hardship without retaliation, they create a powerful testimony that touches hearts and reshapes public opinion. The sight of dignity under pressure unsettles indifference and stirs empathy. In this way, nonviolence operates not through coercion, but through conversion. Nonviolence requires courage greater than any weapon can provide. It is easier to strike back than to stand firm without striking. It is easier to surrender to rage than to hold fast to restraint. Yet those who walk the nonviolent path discover a strength that cannot be measured by force. They find that moral courage disarms hostility and exposes the emptiness of brutality. Even when faced with threats and intimidation, they persist with steady resolve, grounded in the belief that justice achieved through violence cannot produce lasting peace. The power of nonviolence affirms the interconnectedness of humanity. It understands that harming another ultimately harms oneself, and that reconciliation is the true victory. It challenges societies to move beyond revenge toward restoration, beyond conflict toward community. In its practice, opponents are seen not as permanent enemies, but as potential partners in a shared future. And every act of restraint becomes a step toward healing a divided world. The belief in human dignity rests upon the profound conviction that every person possesses inherent worth that cannot be measured by status, wealth, race, or achievement. This dignity is not earned by accomplishment nor granted by institutions. It is woven into the very fabric of human existence. Before a child speaks their first word or takes their first step, their value is already complete. No government can bestow it, and no prejudice can remove it. It is a sacred inheritance shared equally by all humanity. This belief declares that each individual carries a spark of the divine, a reflection of something eternal and holy. To degrade a person is to insult that divine imprint. To deny opportunity is to deny the unfolding of sacred potential. Human dignity affirms that no life is disposable, no community invisible, and no voice insignificant. It challenges every system that categorizes people into superior and inferior, reminding society that such divisions contradict the deeper truth of shared humanity. The recognition of dignity transforms the way one sees the world. It demands that we look beyond labels and stereotypes, beyond the surface differences that so often divide. It invites us to see our neighbors not as strangers, but as brothers and sisters bound together in a common destiny. When we truly accept human dignity, discrimination becomes morally impossible, exploitation becomes intolerable, and indifference becomes a betrayal of conscience. This belief also calls for the protection of rights and freedoms. If every person has inherent worth, then every person deserves access to justice, education, meaningful work, and participation in society. Denial of these opportunities is not merely a social failure, it is a moral offense. Human dignity requires structures that uplift rather than oppress, policies that empower rather than marginalize. It insists that equality is not a charitable gesture, but a moral necessity rooted in the recognition of shared value. The belief in human dignity fosters compassion and responsibility. When we acknowledge the sacred worth of others, we cannot remain unmoved by their suffering. Poverty ceases to be a distant statistic and becomes a call to action. Injustice ceases to be someone else's burden and becomes a collective concern. Dignity compels solidarity, urging communities to stand together against forces that demean or exclude. It also strengthens personal identity. Those who have been told they are less than human can find restoration in the affirmation of their intrinsic value. This belief counters narratives of inferiority and replaces them with a vision of worthiness and potential. It encourages individuals to rise with confidence, to claim their rightful place in society, and to pursue their aspirations without apology. The belief in human dignity ultimately shapes the moral character of a nation. A society that honors dignity cultivates respect, fairness, and mutual care. A society that ignores it descends into division and moral decay. The measure of progress is not found in material prosperity alone, but in the extent to which every person is treated with reverence and equality, recognized not for what they produce, but for who they are. The interconnectedness of humanity is the profound truth that no individual stands alone, no nation exists in isolation, and no action occurs without consequence for the larger whole. We are bound together in a web of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What touches one life sends ripples across communities, across borders, and across generations. The idea that one person can rise while another is crushed beneath injustice is a dangerous illusion, for the health of the whole depends upon the well-being of each part. This interconnectedness reveals that suffering cannot be confined to a single corner of society. When injustice is permitted in one place, it weakens the moral fabric everywhere. A child denied education in one neighborhood diminishes the collective promise of the nation. A worker exploited for profit undermines the dignity of labor for all workers. An act of prejudice committed in silence corrodes the conscience of the broader community. The threads of humanity are so tightly woven that a tear in one strand strains the entire fabric. The truth of our connection challenges the myth of rugged individualism that ignores responsibility for others. While individuality is a gift, it flourishes best within community. Each person's freedom is linked to the freedom of their neighbor. Each person's security is tied to the security of others. We breathe the same air, depend upon the same earth, and share the same fragile world. The boundaries drawn by geography or culture cannot sever the deeper reality that we belong to one human family. Interconnectedness also calls for empathy. To recognize that we are bound together is to understand that another's pain is not foreign to us. Compassion becomes more than an emotion. It becomes an ethical obligation. When we witness injustice, we cannot dismiss it as someone else's burden. Silence in the face of oppression becomes participation in its endurance. The call of interconnectedness urges us to listen, to stand in solidarity, and to act in ways that affirm shared humanity. This principle extends beyond social justice into the moral choices of everyday life. The products we consume, the words we speak, the attitudes we nurture, all influence the larger community. Acts of kindness ripple outward just as surely as acts of cruelty. A gesture of understanding can build bridges across divisions, while a careless remark can deepen wounds. Each decision contributes to either the healing or the fracturing of the collective spirit. The interconnectedness of humanity invites cooperation over competition, reconciliation over resentment, and unity over division. It reminds us that progress achieved at the expense of others is not true progress at all. The prosperity of a few cannot compensate for the suffering of many. Genuine advancement arises when systems are shaped to uplift the entire community, ensuring that no one is excluded from opportunity or respect. In acknowledging our shared destiny, we come to see that the struggle for justice is not the responsibility of a single group, but a collective calling that summons every conscience to participate in the ongoing work of building a world where each life is valued and every voice is heard. Faith in redemptive suffering is the understanding that pain, when borne with courage and purpose, possesses a transformative power that can awaken conscience, shape character, and advance justice. It is the conviction that suffering, though never sought for its own sake, need not be wasted, for it carries within it the seeds of renewal and the potential to illuminate paths of righteousness. To endure hardship without bitterness, to confront injustice without yielding to hate, is to harness suffering as a force for moral awakening and societal change. This faith is rooted in the recognition that life is not free from struggle. The oppressed know intimately the sting of discrimination, the sting of deprivation, the sting of humiliation, and the sting of violence. To deny the reality of suffering is to deny the human experience itself. Yet suffering is not solely a burden to bear. It is an instrument through which the strength of spirit is revealed and the conscience of the oppressor can be stirred. When the oppressed endure with dignity and maintain their commitment to justice, they expose the cruelty and falsehood of injustice in a way that mere argument or protest often cannot achieve. Redemptive suffering requires intentionality. It is not passive resignation, but active engagement with one's pain in the pursuit of a higher purpose. It teaches that endurance must be coupled with moral vision, that patience must be paired with courage, and that pain, when met with love rather than hatred, can create a moral force more compelling than any weapon. The act of suffering without retaliation becomes a mirror that reflects the injustice back to society, awakening empathy, challenging indifference, and demanding accountability. This principle also nurtures inner strength. Those who confront suffering with faith discover depths of resilience they may never have known. Each trial becomes a teacher, each hardship a lesson in courage and perseverance. The soul is refined in the fire of difficulty, emerging with clarity of purpose and conviction. The individual learns that true strength is not the capacity to avoid suffering, but the capacity to endure it with integrity and hope, turning anguish into action and despair into determination. Faith in redemptive suffering also illuminates the moral interconnectedness of humanity. When one bears suffering with courage, it inspires others to stand, to act, and to confront injustice in their own spheres. The example of endurance galvanizes communities, creating momentum for change that spreads beyond the individual. Suffering then ceases to be an isolated affliction and becomes a shared instrument for awakening conscience and advancing justice. It reminds society that oppression cannot endure indefinitely, for the moral power of the suffering, when coupled with faith and perseverance, becomes an unstoppable force for transformation. Through this lens, suffering is no longer meaningless. It is a call to higher purpose, a means by which injustice is exposed, and a catalyst for moral and social redemption. It is a force that shapes leaders, strengthens movements, and fosters empathy in the hearts of those who witness it. Those who embrace this faith understand that the path to justice is often strewn with obstacles, that courage must confront pain, and that the human spirit possesses a capacity for endurance and hope that transcends circumstance. Hope is not merely a fleeting feeling or a wish for better days. It is a revolutionary force that moves mountains, challenges oppression, and reshapes the course of history. True hope is active, not passive. It does not sit quietly in the heart waiting for circumstances to change, but rises boldly to confront injustice and envision a world transformed by justice, equality, and love. It is the fuel that sustains the weary, the compass that guides those lost in darkness, and the unshakable conviction that tomorrow can be better than today. Hope in this revolutionary sense demands courage. To hope in the face of oppression is to defy despair, to declare that injustice will not have the final word, and to commit to the long, often painful struggle for change. It refuses to allow the present difficulties to dictate the limits of possibility. Those who embrace hope understand that setbacks are not permanent, that obstacles are not insurmountable, and that the arc of history bends toward justice through persistent effort, moral clarity, and collective action. Hope inspires action. It compels individuals and communities to step into the arena, to engage in nonviolent resistance, to march, to speak, and to demand fairness. It is a call that reminds us that we are not powerless in the face of oppression. Even small acts of courage, motivated by hope, create ripples that expand across communities and generations. The presence of hope transforms despair into determination, inaction into movement, and fear into resolve. It encourages people to dream beyond the constraints of circumstance and to envision solutions that elevate the human spirit. At its core, hope affirms the inherent dignity and worth of every human being. It sees a future where equality is not a distant aspiration but a tangible reality, where opportunity is not reserved for a few but shared by all. Hope challenges societies to confront systemic injustice, to question laws and traditions that perpetuate inequality, and to replace them with institutions that reflect fairness, compassion, and respect for human life. It is a moral demand as well as an emotional anchor, guiding both thought and deed toward the realization of justice. Hope also carries a transformative power that extends beyond individual struggle. It strengthens communities, unites movements, and fuels the collective imagination necessary to break the chains of oppression. When people share hope, it multiplies, creating solidarity and resilience that cannot be extinguished by violence, discrimination, or fear. It enables the oppressed to envision themselves not as victims, but as architects of a just future. It inspires allies to join the fight, knowing that change is possible and worth pursuing. Finally, hope teaches patience and persistence. Revolutionary change is rarely instantaneous. It is forged through sustained effort, strategic action, and unwavering commitment to moral principles. Hope reminds us that every small victory, every voice raised against injustice, every act of love and courage contributes to the ultimate triumph of justice. It keeps the spirit alive during long struggles, illuminates the path when the way forward seems unclear, and instills the confidence that justice, though delayed, is never denied. My friends, as we reflect upon the philosophy behind the dream, let us remember that it is more than words, more than aspirations, more than speeches spoken from the steps of history. It is a living call to action. It is a moral compass guiding our choices, a light piercing the darkness of injustice, and a bridge connecting hearts across every boundary of race, class, and creed. The dream challenges us to uphold justice wherever it is denied, to practice nonviolence in the face of hatred, and to honor the sacred dignity of every human being. It urges us to recognize our shared humanity, to embrace the transformative power of suffering endured with faith, and to wield hope as a force capable of moving mountains. Each principle is a pillar, and together they form a structure strong enough to support a more just, compassionate, and free society. But understanding alone is not enough. The dream calls for courage in action, perseverance in struggle, and unwavering faith in the ultimate triumph of love and righteousness. It calls on each of us to step forward, to speak truth, to confront injustice, and to build communities where every person can live with dignity and opportunity. It reminds us that progress is not granted. It is made through sacrifice, vision, and a steadfast refusal to accept less than what justice demands. Let us carry this philosophy into our daily lives, into the halls of government, into our neighborhoods, into every classroom, workplace, and home. Let us be the instruments of change, the voices of conscience, the hands that lift others from despair into hope. And let us remember that the dream does not belong to the past. It belongs to us and to the generations who will follow. So rise with courage, walk in love, and act with conviction, knowing that the principles behind the dream are not distant ideals. They are living truths that have the power to transform hearts, reshape communities, and remake the world in the image of justice and peace. Let the dream live, not only in our words, but in our deeds, and let it shine as a beacon for all who long for freedom, equality, and humanity's highest calling.